Hey all, it's KR, King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about the spells that your NPCs and your monsters have, thinking about those spells in kind of a creative, how can I use what they have kind of way. Because oftentimes we think about spells, you see players do this all the time, they want AoE spells, they want damage spells, a lot of the kind of more utility spells, maybe they'll take, first of all, will they learn them in terms of the spells that they learn as they go up each level? But even if they do have them, say a cantrip or something, they don't use them very often. They don't think about them. And the nice thing about monsters in the monster manual, oftentimes they'll say, these are the spells that these creatures are taking if they have spell casting abilities. Now, first of all, you might just as a GM say, well, I'm going to take whatever spells I want, or, they give you the list, but they have 3 slots, the example that I'm going to use today, and you might say, well, I'm just going to take 3 of this useful spell. But I think when you stick with what they're giving in the book, especially something I'm going to be using lizard folk, which are the lizard folk, shaman has a 10 intelligence. Now I'm going to be using some tactics with this, but with a 10 intelligence, it might just take, all these other spells that you think of are not as useful. But in fact, when you start to think about it, as I did for this encounter, you realize, well, there's actually some strategy here that I can use. And how this came about, it was at a campaign, this is about a year ago, almost a year exactly. My group that I run at a tabletop, it's a live game at a game store, they were trying to do a favor for this green dragonborn druid, and these lizard folk deep in this swamp. She hadn't heard from them. There were rumors that something was going on, and so she said, you guys go in there. They went on these boats up these long rivers. It was sort of a Apocalypse Now kind of vibe, going up river, and they went deep into this swamp, and they encountered these lizard folk. They had a shaman, and then they had this lizard king who had been corrupted by this evil god, and they were sacrificing. They went war with other lizard folk and were sacrificing people and doing all sorts of evil rites to try to bring this god back. So, of course, the player characters had to end this, right? And along the way, this lizard folk kind of knew what was happening. They knew they were coming up river, Colonel Kurtz knew that Willard was coming for him. So they were a little bit prepared. And this changed things in terms of how the shaman, who had the spell capabilities, how she organized the forces. The lizard folk king was much more of this sort of arrogant, he'd been corrupted by this demon and everything. The shaman, she actually ran the show. And if you look at the lizard folk descriptors, it says, oftentimes a shaman will be running things, and then every once in a while a lizard folk king arises, and what happened here. So what I did was I looked at the spells that this shaman have, and I thought about them in terms of how this might help them defend themselves on this, coming attack. So I'm going to look over the stats of the shaman, look over these spells, talk about the terrain with the map that I was using as the players came upon this lizard folk. It was a minor village. It was this temple. So again, it's a long story, as all D&D things are. Abandoned long ago temple, evil god. The swamp came in, maybe because of some conflagration, battle, how this works. The terrain is changed by magical effects. The lizard folk had discovered this, been corrupted by it. So they had this kind of mini little village where this is where they came to do their vile rites and sacrifices. So it wasn't their main village. The players had already gone to that, and so that's part of the reason that they knew they were coming. So the geography was set up such you've got water, you've got creatures in the water, and you've got to approach this from a certain spot. The players had to approach it. So that geography altered the tactics of the lizard folk shaman. So let's dive in, look a little bit at the lizard folk, her capabilities, look at these spells, and then think about this geography in terms of how she might organize this battle. So this is the situation kind of on the ground when the players approach this lizard folk, set up at this temple, this abandoned temple. I did this in Fantasy Grounds to just show this visually. Obviously, I actually drew this out on a battle map for the players. Although now I have this a screen, a TV thing that one of my players built for me that I may show later on here. It was really cool what he did. So I can put this right on the table. But anyway, this up here is a tower. This ancient tower that is a remnant. This place flooded after this battle that occurred. So this tower, and it has a water access here. This is around here is both stone here work, and then a wall that comes around here. There's stairs up here. There's stairs up to this top where the sacrifice pool. Here you have the lizard folk shaman and the lizard king. So they're standing up there. They can see quite a ways from this tower here. Here you have where the players are going to be approaching this. This is this village, this temporary village where they stay when they're doing their sacrifices. This is a raft conveniently placed for the players. So they choose. Then the players are, this is the group, this area is, all of this in here, this jungle, is difficult terrain, concealed, but the lizard folk have ways of, they have their own paths, their secret ways that they can come in here. So they're going to be on either side of these players. There's a chance the players can make a passive perception and see them, but this is where they are approaching this landing here to take this across. These are 5-foot squares. So these distances, so for instance, if we start with a, let's say a pointer, and we look at this distance, say from her to this spot here, that's 85 feet. And again, this distance across, I'll make another pointer here. We're looking at only 30 feet across there at the narrowest point. But of course, there's creatures in here, right? So one of the things, as I mentioned, this 10 intelligence here, that's what's specified in the book. You can decide to increase that. I think I might a little bit, but also you can just argue that they're very familiar with this area. We look down at these spells, and this is, again, has the following druid spells prepared. It's very clear. Now, it has 4 slots, so how many? You say 2 entangles, 2 fog clouds, maybe. You say 1 or 2 spike growths, 1 heat metal, and then 1 of each of these conjure animals. But all of these spells, in terms of this situation, have some really interesting implications. So the one I'm going to start with is plant growth. And I put this up next to spike growth because it has both of these. But when we look at plant growth, it's an instantaneous spell that causes plants with a 100-foot radius at a range of 150 feet to become thick and overgrown such that any creature moving through the area must spend 4 feet of movement for every 5. The other interesting thing is you can exclude 1 or more areas of any size within the spell's effect from being affected. Now, this is a spell that is permanent, right? The plants are there, they're thick and overgrown. This can get into a logic thing, as we'll see. If we go back to our map, if this shaman sees them coming from up on this tower, and she decides to throw this spell, say right to that point, right there, 85 feet, no problem. And that can go up to 100-foot radius. I mean, that's the whole map. Okay? Now, the thing about that is, let me just see if I can. There it is, 100 feet radius. Okay, that's a 100-foot radius right there. That's huge. Of course, the thing is, she can exclude 1 or more areas. So, in fact, this doesn't, you go in here, she could exclude pathways in here for these lizard folk because they're going to be, they're going to have that difficult terrain as well. Again, you're getting into, okay, wait a second, how smart is this, this shaman and stuff? But maybe this is something that she's prepared for. Maybe it's something she's thought about. Now, the other logic thing is this has to be the first time this happened unless everybody has worn these down and then you could say that they've worn down paths so that they've done this sort of difficult terrain before because it doesn't say they dissipate. So maybe all of this, if you wanted, I didn't do it this way. I just said this is the first time she's done. So the players could, in theory, come through here and find these paths that are made. So all the other area is going to be that way anyway. So the point is she sees them here and she throws this spell depending on the initiative. Now each of these characters, in order to move a 5 foot, they're going to just be able to move 1 square because that's the equivalent 5 feet of 20 feet. And none of them have 40 feet of movement. So they're going to be stuck with 1 square. And their goal is to come up here potentially and either, blast with some distance spells. I think they've got this half cleric is a light cleric. I think they were 5th level. I think he might have a fireball. Again, the AoE effect. But they've got to get through this, again, there's going to be paths and stuff in here. And she can exclude all of this. She can just concentrate this just like this if she chooses. All of this becomes that kind of terrain. Okay? And then while they're moving at 5, these guys, if they come up where they can see, in here, if we look at these guys, they've got javelins, +4 to hit, 1d6.2. They have 2 attacks, melee attacks, but they have to use each one with a different weapon. So the only ranged weapon that they have is the javelin because they're not necessarily, their instructions might be to stay back and just use their javelins to harass the group as they move forward. And now looking back at this, after that turn where she throws this plant growth, that's done. That's not concentration. She can now do something concentration. So let's look, and I had it on that slide, let's look at spike growth because that is a nasty little spell. What spike growth does, a 20-foot radius centered on a point, it's difficult terrain, which we already have because of the plant growth, right? I mean, it's even more than that. And everything takes 2d4 for every 5 feet it travels. So now our players, as they go through here, because a 20-foot radius, again, she can put this right here if she so chooses. So now all of these players, as they're going forth or trying to run away potentially, it's not going to bother them if they run away, I suppose, but, you have to go through and you're going to take 2d4 every time, every move. So not only are they getting harassed as they go along by these lizard men, I mean, again, they're blasting it. If they can be seen, although they've got some concealment, but if they can see them, each side can see each other. So now you've got that effect. And she doesn't have, now she has to concentrate on this one. So once she decides to do something else, or if this cleric can get forward to where he can see her, because technically at this point, I didn't put line of sight, but he's got to get up here, 1, 2, 5, maybe at this point, if she could see this, he could probably see her up there. He might be able to shoot at her to disrupt this, right, to break her concentration. So right now, our shaman, she's concentrating on her spike growth. So unless it gets broken by an attack, or she chooses she's not going to throw another concentration spell, for example, conjure animals here, or fog cloud or something, she's going to just potentially use other capabilities or just let her minions pick off the players to see what happens next. So the players may try to move into this area, but of course they have to find the areas that the lizard folk are, but maybe they find these paths, they defeat the lizard folks and they go like this and they're coming up and they're out of sight, right? So what does she do next? So I'll just say that. They defeat these guys, they find their way in here, they're slogging it out, and they come up along this shoreline. Again, this is going to take some time, right? Because of this difficult. And again, so what is she doing? Well, there's a couple things that I had set up here. There's crocodiles in this water. And these lizard folk, when they're sacrificing people, they will sometimes they eat it, but they also honor these crocodiles, and they'll throw the body parts and whatever they've sacrificed into here. And these crocodiles that are in this jungle will all come out. They know it's feeding time. Remember that James Bond movie where Bond is there and they're feeding? So they know that this is feeding time, and the players can see this. So the players, unless they have some kind, they don't want to swim across here. Plus, you've got a Dragonborn paladin who's armored, heavily armored. The gnome monk and the cleric too. They're armored. They don't want to swim across here. The boat is here conveniently enough. So if they, again, work their way, now the thing about the javelins is, if you've got, I just have these guys up here, but suppose you had some guys at these walls. Okay. The javelins have a range of 30 feet. So they're out of range. So maybe she would just, stop concentrating on it. Once she sees them in here, they know they're out of range or these guys have been neutralized and she wants to do something else. So what can she do? Now, again, the spike growth is at 20. You got 3 slots here. The heat metal is a very specific utility spell. It can be really useful if someone's wearing armor, so don't discount it. But in this situation, if she's got an extra slot, she could throw another spike growth and put that in, let's say, like that. So the players come around here. They've got to make their way through here. They've got to go through this spike growth. And you can't get around it. Now, maybe flying. And what they did was they carried, the gnome monk went on someone's back. Okay, and they were just being carried because they wanted to get to this thing. But they're taking that damage every time. So you have Entangle and Fog Cloud. Let's look at Fog Cloud first. So this is a 20-foot radius of fog, and when you have this in an area until a wind of moderate or greater speed, again, here's where you've got to roll. Is it windy today? But you're in this swamp. You tend to think of them as very, close quarters and not particularly windy, right? So you can concentrate on this for an hour, and basically the area is heavily obscured. The players can't see things. They're basically, if you look at the effect, it's like they're blinded, like a darkness spell. But you can't see in. So the thing about this spell is she doesn't know what the players are up to if she does this. And they don't necessarily know her, but they can stumble forward. If they've seen where the raft is before this occurred, they can stumble their way up and find their way to the raft and then get into the water and start sort of growing a general area. So in a way, it hurts her because the thing about this is to attack someone, like you hear them or whatever, you have disadvantage. And for them to attack anyone out of the tower, again, they can't see them, you have disadvantage too. And you can't see. You can't use spells that require visual. You can't see. So the usefulness of this in this situation as a concentration spell, to me, doesn't warrant it. If we look at the Entangle spell, this too, concentration, this does have the plants come up, spring up from the ground. And really, would you do that necessarily? Maybe, because you got to have it can be restrained. But the thing is, they're out of range of the javelins. Now, obviously, you can go 60 feet is long range with the javelin, but you're at disadvantage at that stage. So again, even though the players are moving really slowly, how many javelins do they really have? That sort of thing, but they're going to be throwing them each turn. Maybe they just toss them at disadvantage just because it's better than nothing. But it's too bad that it has a little bit too short of a range here. Although once the players get on the raft, that's another story. So that's why if we're going to use a concentration spell, I say we use conjure animals. Reptiles only. Here's the thing about that. There are some really cool beasts that you can call up with this. Notice you've got challenge rating 2 or lower 1. You get 2 at 1 challenge rating, 4 at a half, and 8 at a quarter. And if we look at some of these creatures, like look at Allosaurus, 2 challenge rating. It's got a +6 to hit, 1d8 plus 4 damage. And if it comes out now, again, this is a concentration spell. So she's going to give up on the plant growth is still going to be there. So it's not going to have that intense, straightforward movement. So maybe you can't displace, that's where it's concentration. It's there. So you kind of lose that, right? Unless you create a path or something for it to move. Again, now we're getting into, I'm not quite sure the shaman would have that much intelligence to do that. So maybe you want to do a pteranodon, a flying creature. It's a quarter CR. That means you could have 8 of those. And if you look at these, they can fly in. Now, they only have a +3 to hit, but they do 2d4 plus 1 piercing. And here's the other thing. When they don't provoke an attack of opportunity, they can fly in, attack, fly back. So the players are going to have to use arrows or something. Again, they don't have that many hit points, low AC. Or you can try the old flying snake. It, too, doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity. That's 1/8, so basically you get 8 of those. And you do, if you hit 1 piercing, but 3d4 poison damage. And again, the way things turned out, it was a little more complicated. They kept breaking her concentration, so that's part of this. What she did was she called up a plesiosaurus. So this plesiosaurus, when they got on the raft and went across, the plesiosaurus appeared here and attacked the group. Again, that is a 2 CR creature, +6 to hit, and it does 3d6 plus 4. And all of this is being done while the players are, I'm going to get rid of all these pointers. All of this is being done as the players are approaching, and they got to come around like this, and they got to land here and come up this way, which is what they did. And they were fighting them all the way. And then they had their final confrontation. And it's not on this slide, it's a little farther down in the monster manual, but the lizard folk shaman also has the ability to polymorph herself into a crocodile for 1 hour. And in fact, what she did, when the battle did start to go badly for the lizard folk, she ran off here and dove over this thing into the water and turned herself into a crocodile. And then there's an underground entrance to this. So that was, and she kind of made her final stand there and everything. But it was close because they took a lot of damage. They had a lot of slowdown. And it all came down to these spells. Because I looked at these and thought about what are interesting ways that you can use these that are not conventional spells that you take all the time, but what's given in the book. How can I use those to make this more interesting? So a couple of things here to note. As I mentioned, the lizard folk shaman has an intelligence of 10. Would she be able to utilize these tactics that I, just went over? Is that kind of unfair? There's that book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, which is a very interesting book, has some great ideas in it. But I've heard some criticisms of it from other GMs where, I don't play, monsters to necessarily use every single advantage, especially if they don't have a high intelligence. Which I think in that book he talks about, but whatever, I get that. But I say a couple things. First of all, the shaman, it says in the book that 10 intelligence, the king has an 11, the regular ones have a 7. Well, okay, why a 10? Couldn't you have a shaman that has a 15? I don't know. They have spell capabilities. Maybe when they've encountered this evil force, it raised their intelligence. I don't know, but I don't even need that. I just say, it's a little bit smarter. That's why it's a shaman. And the Lizard King is actually not that smart. She's much smarter. And so she's going to use these tactics potentially. So that's one aspect of it. But secondly, when creatures have lived in a place for a while, and they're defending their territory, they're going to know things to do. They're going to think about things in a more sophisticated and more thought through way than just, wandering the wilderness or something. Or the lizard folk have to do something and they wander out into the forest or, a desert. Why would they do that? But if they did, they're going to start to, that lower intelligence is going to show up a little more than when they're at home. When a creature is in its lair, when it's in familiar territory, it's going to have a better sense of what to do. And another thing to think about as a GM is when the players use these kind of utility spells, these kind of, a little bit, not the AoE damage spells that everybody's always taking, but they're trying to use something creatively, because that's the thing. You got to be creative. What does a spell do, whether rules is written or inferred, and how can I use that in some creative way? And say yes. Say yes, and I suppose, or yes, but if you're trying to limit things, because too many GMs, when you try these kind of things, then this is just a couple spells, but all the different utility spells or mage hand or, prodigious, the one, the cantrip where the minor illusion style cantrip, and they just kind of go, oh, nothing happens. It doesn't go. I mean, I've seen this many times. And it's frustrating. Oh, all you see is, does it do damage? What are the dice? There we go. So if you're going to do this with your NPCs and your monsters, you're going to come up with something really creative. You got to let the players do it too. You got to be willing to, because otherwise it just turns into slam battle. And when your monsters are doing clever things, I guarantee you the players will see this and think about them as well. So hopefully that's helpful to you. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. Always looking for more. Leave me some comments. I'd love to hear some creative ways you've used some, not so typical spells or utility spells or whatever you want to call them. But most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.